I stood at the top of the stairs, paint fumes burning my nose, watching a crib take shape where my nightstand used to be. My suitcase was gone. My reading lamp vanished. And the woman who married my son stood on a ladder, rolling blue over the walls I once called home. "We need the space," she said, like it was hers to claim. Just like that, my room belonged to a baby that hadn't even been born yet. And I, the woman who paid for every brick in this house, had been demoted to a garage and a folding cot. That's when I realized, if they could repaint my walls without asking, I could rewrite the deed without warning. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The sharp chemical sting of fresh paint hit Marilyn's nostrils the moment she reached the top of the stairs. Something else followed close behind. Music, tinny and upbeat, drifting from a Bluetooth speaker on the floor. She stepped around a bundle of drop cloths in the hallway and turned toward what had always been her room. It wasn't hers anymore. The eggshell walls she'd carefully repainted 2 summers ago were now smeared in an icy blue called cloudless sky. The kind you saw in catalogs, never real life. A crib lay half-assembled in the corner, and a stack of flat-packed nursery furniture leaned against the closet. On the ladder stood Haley, 8 months pregnant and glowing with smugness. She turned slightly, catching sight of Marilyn. "Oh," she chirped, cheeks flushed. "Didn't think you'd be back from the store yet. Surprise." Marilyn didn't respond right away. She looked over the room methodically, wall to wall, inch by inch. Her suitcase was gone, the cedar chest, the framed photographs, even her reading lamp. Erased, like she'd never lived there at all. "I thought this was still the guest room," Marilyn said, her voice smooth and measured. "It was," Haley said brightly, stepping down and wiping her hands on a paint-splattered rag. "But with the baby coming, we really need the extra space. And this room gets the best morning light. It just made sense." Marilyn raised an eyebrow. "You didn't ask." Haley smiled wider. "Oh, come on, it's not like that. We're all family. There's no need to be territorial." Marilyn looked at the dresser now shoved into the hallway. One of the drawers had split open slightly from the move. Her folded scarves, once kept neatly, now hung like torn fabric flags. Her throat tightened, but she kept her hands still. "And where do I go?" Haley picked up the paint roller again. "Trey said maybe we could set up a cot in the garage. It's just temporary. Once the baby's sleeping through the night, we'll figure something else out." Marilyn didn't blink. "The garage." "Don't make it a thing," Haley said quickly. "You'll still have privacy. I mean, you're hardly ever home anyway." Behind her, footsteps creaked up the stairs. Trey appeared in the hallway, his work boots leaving faint scuffs on the newly polished floors. "Ma, let's just not make this ugly," he said. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Is this what you want?" Marilyn asked him directly. Trey shrugged. "I'm caught in the middle here." Haley laughed like someone closing a sale. "It's not a big deal, Marilyn. Honestly, it's just a cot. Just a cot. In the garage. In August." Marilyn's gaze swept over the pale blue walls, the crib she hadn't approved, the room that no longer smelled like lavender and wood polish, but latex paint and lemon-scented cleaner. She didn't reply. Not to Haley, not to Trey. She simply turned around, walked out, and headed down the stairs. She didn't rush. Her hand trailed the banister. Her fingers itched, not from age, but from restraint. In the hallway closet, tucked behind the vacuum and a box of Christmas lights, sat a lockbox she hadn't opened in over 5 years. She carried it to the dining room table and retrieved a narrow brass key from inside a teacup in the china hutch. The lock popped with a soft metallic click. Inside, papers, neatly bundled, sorted by date and clipped into manila folders. One bore handwriting she hadn't seen since 2003, her husband's. Still firm and deliberate. Deed, Boon residence. She pulled it out slowly. Her fingers didn't shake. There it was, her name, in ink. On the original title, no Haley, no Trey, just Marilyn Elaine Boon, paid in full with her retirement buyout, long before Trey ever met Haley over beers and borrowed confidence. She sat back in the dining chair and folded her hands over the document, the edge of her mouth lifting, not in a smile, but something colder, calmer, older. "They've had their turn," she murmured. And for the first time in months, Marilyn slept that night with the door locked, not from fear, but because she finally had a plan. The morning light poured through the kitchen blinds, slicing across the table where the deed lay open like a wound no one had noticed until now. Marilyn sipped her coffee, black, no sugar, and studied every line as if it might vanish if she blinked. Her name was typed neatly at the top of the page. Marilyn Elaine Boon. Not shared, not co-signed, just hers. She had almost forgotten how much of herself she'd buried in this house, how many nights she'd stayed up balancing accounts, how many calls she'd made to the mortgage lender when Trey lost his first job. After her husband passed, the house became her anchor. Trey moved in temporarily, then came Haley, and suddenly temporary grew roots. Marilyn turned the next page in the folder. There it was, the amendment from 8 years ago. She had added Trey's name to the title right before his wedding, under the naive belief that building a family meant building trust. But she had been careful. The paperwork, notarized and filed with the county, gave Trey 34% ownership. Not half, not equal, just enough to help him feel like a provider. She tapped her fingernail on the line that confirmed her majority stake. Still mine. A knock sounded on the side door. Rita didn't wait for an answer. She rarely did. She pushed it open with the heel of her sneaker and stepped inside, wearing her usual oversized denim shirt and a pair of earrings shaped like tiny gavels. "Morning," she said, setting down a brown paper bag. "Brought kolaches. Figured you'd need brain fuel." Marilyn slid the folder toward her without a word. Rita adjusted her glasses, scanned the deed, and let out a low whistle. "You're still the primary owner," she confirmed, tapping the edge of the paper. "They've just got the walls." Marilyn nodded, tight-lipped. Rita leaned in. "You ever think about reminding them of that?" "I just did," Marilyn said, standing and walking to the kitchen drawer. She pulled out a yellow legal pad, flipped it open to a fresh page, and began to write. Date, time, subject, words, tone. She had already started logging it all. From the moment Haley announced the nursery plan, without asking, to Trey's "we'll figure it out," she'd been writing it down. The tone Haley used when offering the cot, the smirk, the phrasing, every word had weight when it landed on paper. "Been a long time since I had to keep records," Marilyn muttered. "Feels like work again." "Then treat it like a job," Rita said. "You paid for this house. You raised that boy. Now they want to move you out like a bad habit." Marilyn opened another envelope, this one filled with tax statements. Year after year, the property taxes were paid from her account. No reimbursements, no splits. She even found a recent receipt from 3 months ago when she paid the HOA fee because Haley didn't have her purse on her. Rita peeked over her shoulder. "Oh, they're gonna wish they'd taken a civics class." From the living room, Marilyn overheard Trey and Haley arguing. Something about a back-ordered crib. Then a number. $2,100 for a crib? Marilyn asked flatly. Rita laughed without humor. Must be made out of conscience, since they've got none. Marilyn stared out the window at the dogwood tree she planted the year Trey graduated high school. It had survived a drought, a freeze, and 2 windstorms, and it still bloomed. "You think I'm too late?" she asked. "No," Rita said. "I think you're right on time." Marilyn rose, walked to the hallway, and opened a cabinet she hadn't touched in years. Inside, a battered Rolodex. She thumbed through it until she found a name written in thick blue ink. Merritt Carl, Real Estate Law. She wrote down the number. Then she picked up the phone and dialed. "Carl Merritt's office," came a woman's voice on the other end. "Yes," Marilyn said calmly. "I'd like to schedule a consultation." She paused. "It's regarding property boundaries." And just like that, the walls Haley painted were no longer hers to keep. The conference room smelled faintly of old leather, coffee, and something warm and earthy. Cedar, maybe. Marilyn sat perfectly still, her back straight against the high-backed chair, her hands folded atop the folder she'd carried like a weapon. A framed black and white photo of the Texas Capitol hung above the bookshelves, and just below it stood Carl Merritt, thick mustache, crisp linen shirt, and scuffed cowboy boots planted like he was ready for a standoff at high noon. He flipped through the documents silently, glasses balanced on the edge of his nose. The only sound was the soft brush of paper on paper as he turned pages, pausing every so often to grunt or nod. You paid the entire down payment, he asked, not looking up. With my severance, Marilyn said, after 32 years at Allstate. Mortgage payoff? From my pension, the year after my husband passed. Carl pulled out a pen and tapped it on the folder, then opened a second binder and started cross-checking figures. Tax statements are still in your name. Utility bills, too. And this, he said, holding up the amended deed with a flick of his wrist. Only gave your son a partial interest. Haley's name's not on anything. Marilyn didn't blink. Not even the electric bill. Now he looked at her. You're not a guest here, ma'am. You're the landlord with receipts. The corner of Marilyn's mouth lifted slightly. Not a smile, just recognition. Carl stood, moved to the printer, and pulled a crisp legal letter from a tray. Let me do what I do best. This here is a cease and desist. It outlines your majority ownership and formally bars any unauthorized changes to the property, remodels, disposals, furniture replacements, or tenant displacement. He handed it to her like a lit match. You give this to them in person. They'll hear from me tomorrow. Marilyn folded it carefully and tucked it into her purse. Thank you. Carl leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed. You'd be surprised how many families try this kind of thing. But Texas law? It don't care about baby registries or gender reveal parties. It cares about paper. Rita met Marilyn in the parking lot, perched on the hood of her hatchback like she was waiting for a rodeo to start. Well, she asked, swinging her legs down. They're about to learn what homestead law means, Marilyn said simply. That night, the smell hit her before she reached the hallway. Plastic, cardboard, lavender dryer sheets. She followed it to find 3 moving boxes stacked neatly outside the garage door. Her floral bedspread had been stuffed inside one, half of it dragging on the floor. Beside it sat her jewelry case, sealed with duct tape. In the living room, Haley was on the couch with her swollen feet propped up, flipping through a baby catalog like royalty. Just trying to get organized, she said, without looking up. Marilyn didn't respond. She walked past her, slow and silent, until she reached the garage. Inside, an old army cot had been set up beside the tool bench, a lamp extension cord snaking across the concrete. She ran a hand along the cot's frayed edge. Behind her, Trey appeared, rubbing the back of his neck like a boy caught stealing change from a purse. We didn't mean to hurt you, he said softly. Let's not make this ugly. Marilyn turned, eyes flat as steel. Too late for that. He started to speak, but she was already walking past him, back into the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water and sipped it, slow and steady, while the letter in her purse pressed cold against her hip. The next afternoon, Haley opened the front door to find a courier holding out an envelope. Are you Mrs. Boon? He asked. Yeah, she said cautiously. He handed her the sealed letter. You've been served. Her face paled as she opened it and read the first line. Formal notice, unauthorized property modification and control. And upstairs, Marilyn calmly unpacked the boxes someone else had packed for her, one shirt at a time, without saying a single word. Marilyn found it buried beneath a pile of torn gift wrap in the kitchen trash. Her terry cloth bathrobe, the one with her initials stitched near the collar, stuffed down like it was garbage. The scent of her lavender laundry soap still clung to the fabric, faint but unmistakable. She pulled it out slowly, piece by piece, as if unearthing something sacred. Across the kitchen island, Haley looked up from her laptop and smirked. We're decluttering for the baby, she said, not bothering to hide her satisfaction. That old thing smelled like mothballs. Marilyn didn't flinch. She folded the robe over her arm, brushed a crumb from its hem, and walked upstairs, past the baby monitor, past the Pinterest quotes taped to the nursery door, and into her room, which was no longer hers. The letter Carl had drafted sat waiting on her dresser. It had already been served, but Haley had done what Haley always did. Smiled, dismissed, and carried on. She's bluffing, Haley had told Trey that morning, loud enough for Marilyn to hear through the vent. Let her waste her Social Security check on lawyers. The judge'll laugh her right out of court. She'd laughed too soon. By noon, Carl had filed a formal injunction, Marilyn's name headlining the request to halt all unauthorized modifications to the property. The wording was clean, crisp, and surgical. Cease all interior alterations to the subject premises effective immediately. By 2 o'clock, a a pair of workers arrived in a plain white van, licenses in the dash, paperwork in hand. "Carl Merritt sent us," one said, "here to reverse an unapproved remodel." They moved fast. First came the crib, hauled out in parts and loaded into the van like it had never belonged. The fresh carpet, barely stapled down, was peeled back and rolled tight. The cloud blue paint was sealed off with primer. Windows opened to flush out the fumes. Marilyn stood in the doorway as they worked, silent as a sentry. She didn't lift a finger, but her presence filled the room like thunder. Downstairs, Haley paced the living room, phone in hand, rage building by the second. "Are you insane? You're sabotaging us," she snapped, stomping to the base of the stairs. "This is for the baby. You're destroying his room," Marilyn finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "I'm reclaiming what's already mine." The silence that followed made the air feel thinner. Haley's mouth opened, then shut. Her fingers tightened around her phone like it might save her. When Trey came home an hour later, the first thing he noticed was the bare floor where the new carpet had been. The second was the box labeled "Nursery, Returned Items," sitting neatly on the front porch. "What the hell happened?" he asked, dropping his work bag by the door. Haley whirled around. She had them undo everything, the paint, the crib, even the carpet. Like some kind of revenge stunt. Trey's eyes went to his mother. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just handed him the injunction paperwork. He scanned it, mouth tightening. "You didn't have to take it this far," he muttered. Marilyn looked at him squarely. "Neither did you." The next day, the house fell into a strange quiet. Haley moved with quick, sharp movements, yanking drawers open like they owed her something. Trey said little, eyes bloodshot. His phone never far from reach. Marilyn noticed when the shredder turned on in the study, slow, constant whirs as documents fed through. She didn't ask what they were. She didn't care. That evening, a courier arrived at the Boon residence for the second time in a week. This time, Marilyn wasn't the one accepting the envelope. Trey signed for it with a wary glance, then handed it to Marilyn, his hand already pulling away. Inside, a petition. Haley's name stamped clean across the top. Request for legal removal of co-owner from property title. The signature was fresh. The ink wasn't even dry. Marilyn read it once, then again. She didn't react, not with words, but she did glance down at her hands, folded calmly over her lap. They weren't trembling, not anymore. Marilyn stared down at the courthouse bench, the grain of the wood worn smooth from decades of restless hands. Beside her, Carl Merritt flipped through a binder thick with documentation, his every movement quiet but confident. The overhead fluorescents buzzed softly above them, like insects trapped in glass. "They actually filed this," he muttered, not to her, but to the paper. "Yes," Marilyn replied, voice low, composed, "claiming I gave them the house, as a wedding gift." Carl scoffed. She must think a lie told with enough perfume turns into truth. From across the room, Haley sat upright in a tailored maternity dress, the color of wet concrete. Her lawyer, a young man with too much cologne and too little experience, whispered something in her ear. She nodded like a politician, calm and collected, the corners of her mouth tugging upward with rehearsed innocence. Marilyn didn't bother looking at Trey. She already knew the expression he'd be wearing, the same one he wore when he was 8 and broke her favorite lamp, then told his teacher he didn't know how it happened. The courtroom doors creaked open. A hush fell as Judge Nora Gillis entered, robes swaying. The clerk read the case title, Boon vs. Boon, Property Ownership Dispute. "Let's keep this civilized," Judge Gillis said, setting her reading glasses on the bench with a soft click. "Start with the petitioner." Haley's lawyer stood, cleared his throat too loudly. "Your Honor, my client asserts that the property in question," he gestured broadly toward the house that wasn't even mentioned by address yet, "was transferred as a gift during the Boon marriage. As such, she requests full reassignment of title in accordance with spousal housing rights and equitable interest." Marilyn didn't flinch, but Carl smiled, barely. "Your Honor," he said, rising slowly, voice smooth as a knife, "we have complete documentation disproving that narrative. Every cent of the down payment came from Ms. Boon's retirement payout. Mortgage, paid by her, taxes. She's been the sole payer since 1997. Utility bills? Same story. And here, he handed over a bound packet, indexed and labeled, is every bank statement notarized, along with copies of the closing disclosures and title amendment. Judge Gillis turned the pages slowly. Interesting, she murmured. Additionally, Carl continued, nodding toward the gallery, we have a notarized affidavit from the original title officer, confirming Ms. Boon's majority ownership and intent during transfer. At that, Rita rose from her seat and walked to the stand like she owned the floor. She wore a navy pantsuit, her silver bob perfectly combed, and her expression fixed with the patience of someone who'd seen more lawsuits than wedding receptions. She handed the clerk the affidavit and took her seat again, offering Haley a look that said, "You picked the wrong old ladies." Judge Gillis raised an eyebrow and leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. "Quite the opposite of a gift, wouldn't you say?" she said dryly. Haley shifted in her seat. Her lawyer whispered furiously. She rolled her eyes and stood anyway. "Your Honor," she said, voice tight, "this isn't about money or paperwork. We're growing our family. We need the space. It's not personal." Marilyn's eyes never left her. Her voice, when it came, was clear. "This is what raising a coward costs." Trey's head snapped toward her, but he didn't say a word. Judge Gillis closed the folder with a soft thump. "Enough. Effective immediately, this court freezes any and all transactions or modifications to the property until a final ruling is made. That includes loans, renovations, evictions, or asset transfers." Haley opened her mouth. Her lawyer touched her arm to stop her. Marilyn stood with quiet finality, her heels clicking once on the tile floor. As they walked out of the courtroom, Carl leaned slightly toward her. "She tried to erase your name," he murmured. "She just carved it in stone." Outside, a breeze swept through the courthouse steps, carrying the smell of cut grass and asphalt warming in the sun. Marilyn inhaled once, then exhaled slowly. There was no thrill in winning, but there was satisfaction in being counted. The hum of the courtroom's air vents did little to calm the current running beneath Marilyn's skin. She sat with her spine ruler straight, palms resting lightly on her lap. Carl Merritt was beside her again, calm, methodical, eyes flicking between his legal pad and the judge's bench, like he was playing chess 5 moves ahead. Across the aisle, Haley dabbed the corner of her eye with a tissue. Her gray sheath dress hugged her belly, the visual of expectant mother wronged, turned into performance. Trey sat slumped beside her, jaw tight, arms folded, avoiding his mother's gaze altogether. His tie was crooked. Judge Nora Gillis leaned forward, reading through the thick packet of documents for what felt like the 3rd time. Her expression remained unreadable, but her eyes sharpened the longer she flipped pages. "Let me get this straight," Judge Gillis finally said, voice firm but not raised. "You're telling the court this house was a wedding gift." Haley's attorney rose, all artificial charm. "Yes, Your Honor. A non-revocable inter vivos gift, supported by intent and shared occupancy." Carl rose before the man finished his next breath. "We've submitted clear evidence this was no gift," he said smoothly. "The majority of the down payment, mortgage payoff, and property taxes have been handled solely by Ms. Boon. She added her son to the deed years later, retaining 66% of the ownership interest." He placed a fresh document on the bench. "We are now formally filing for restoration of full title rights." In light of the petitioner's attempt to conceal that reality, Judge Gillis slid her glasses down her nose and read silently for a moment. Then she looked up, first at Marilyn, then at Haley. "The court does not recognize home ownership as a family favor," she said flatly. "If Ms. Boon had intended to surrender her property rights, she would have done so in writing, which she didn't." Haley's mouth opened, but the judge raised a hand. "Furthermore," she continued, "until a full hearing on the title restoration is held, I am ordering an immediate halt to all remodeling, renovations, furniture additions, or structural changes to the property. Any further actions made in violation will result in contempt proceedings." Carl leaned back slowly in his seat, hands folding. Marilyn didn't move. She didn't have to. Haley shifted in her chair. "She's trying to kick us out," she said bitterly. "It's like elder abuse in reverse." That made Judge Gillis pause. "You're alleging that the woman funding your housing situation is abusing you?" "She's turning our home into a war zone," Haley snapped. "We're about to have a baby. Judge Gillis gave a tight, measured smile. Then I suggest you learn the difference between nesting and financial manipulation. Haley's lawyer blanched. Trey exhaled sharply, still avoiding his mother's gaze. Outside the courthouse, the August sun was relentless. Marilyn walked slowly across the parking lot, the gravel crunching beneath her flats. Rita was waiting in the shade of a sycamore tree near the edge, iced tea in hand. "How'd it go?" she asked, though her eyes already guessed the answer. "She called it nesting," Marilyn murmured, accepting the drink. "The court called it fraud." Carl was a few steps behind. "We're filing for full title restoration next week," he said. "And now we've got precedent on record. Judge Gillis doesn't miss a beat." Rita raised her glass like a toast. Back at the house, Marilyn entered to find Trey in the kitchen, leaning against the sink with a look that was half defeated, half defensive. He didn't speak right away, just turned the faucet on and off twice before finally facing her. "You're hurting the baby," he said quietly. "This stress, this legal stuff, it's not good for Haley or the baby." Marilyn set her purse on the table. "That baby deserves a home not built on lies." He looked away, jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Later that evening, Carl called. His voice was steady, but there was a new edge to it. "I've been going through their financials again," he said. "Pulled a soft check through my contact at the bank." Marilyn straightened. "What did you find?" "They've been applying for a home equity line of credit," he said. "On your house." There was silence, a long one. "They used your property as collateral, Marilyn," he said. "Without your consent." She closed her eyes, not in weariness, but in readiness. The next move would be hers. The text came at 7:12 a.m., a notification from the credit monitoring service Marilyn had signed up for 6 years ago after a brief scare involving a hacked Amazon account. Alert. New financial inquiry reported. Home equity line of credit, $140,000. Pending. Her coffee sat untouched on the counter. The steam curled into the air like a warning flare. She checked the details twice. The application was submitted under Trey's name, but the property listed? Her address? Her home? Her name still on title, still the majority owner. By 9, Carl was on speakerphone with a banking compliance officer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Let me make this very simple," Carl said, pacing slow, controlled steps across his office. "This loan application is fraudulent. My client's name was not authorized for use. She holds majority title. If this process isn't frozen immediately, we'll be filing for injunctive relief by close of business." A long silence on the line. "We'll suspend the file for review," the officer finally said. "Pending verification." "Good," Carl replied, and ended the call without a thank you. Marilyn sat in his office with her arms crossed, her eyes hard and clear. "They were trying to pull the money before the court finalized anything," Carl nodded grimly. "They knew exactly what they were doing. A baby on the way doesn't buy legal amnesty." Back at the house, the tension was molten. Marilyn returned to find Haley pacing in the driveway, phone pressed to her ear and rage written in every line of her face. The moment she saw Marilyn, she snapped the call shut. "You just blew up our entire future," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Marilyn walked past her without flinching. Haley followed, voice rising. "You're sabotaging your own family. Trey was trying to build something for us, for the baby." Marilyn turned, voice calm but stripped to the bone. "You don't build a future on stolen ground." The next morning, a sign appeared in the front yard. White background, black block letters. "This property is under legal protection. No modifications authorized." Rita helped her hammer it into the soil just left of the mailbox. She stepped back, nodding. "You want me to bring over my security cams?" Marilyn gave a single nod. "The ones with audio." By sundown, 2 motion sensor cameras were perched above the garage and back porch. Rita handed over a small monitor with a grin. "Night vision's a little finicky, but it catches enough." Inside, Trey stood by the fridge, hands in his pockets like a boy waiting to be sent to his room. "We didn't think it'd go through," he said quietly. "It was just to see if we could get the line of credit." Marilyn stared at him. "You didn't think it would go through, but you used my house as collateral anyway?" He looked away, swallowing hard. "We're running out of options. Haley's due in 6 weeks." "You had options," she replied. You just didn't like any of them that didn't involve taking what wasn't yours. He reached for compromise the way some men reached for alcohol. Can we at least sit down and talk? Just the two of us? No lawyers, no paperwork. Marilyn picked up a folded receipt from the counter, her HOA dues, paid in full last month, again from her account. She held it up. The time for compromise passed in the paint aisle, and then she walked into the study and shut the door. An hour later, she called Carl. I want to file for exclusive occupancy, she said. A pause. Carl's voice was steady. Then that's what we'll do. This time, the house wouldn't be shared. It would be hers, completely. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and dry paper, cold, sterile, the opposite of home. Marilyn stood before the bench with Carl beside her, both framed against a stack of boxes labeled Exhibits A through E. There was no rage in her face, no bitterness, just exhaustion sharpened into resolve. Across the aisle, Haley was practically reclining in her seat, arms folded across her belly, whispering snide comments to her lawyer. Trey sat next to her, his face carved in worry, avoiding his mother's gaze with surgical precision. Carl stepped forward, voice low but resonant. Your Honor, we are petitioning for exclusive occupancy rights for Ms. Boon, the majority title holder. This is not an eviction, it is a protective action to prevent further exploitation of her property interest by unauthorized cohabitants who've repeatedly violated court orders. Haley leaned in with a laugh that echoed too loud for the space. You hear that? She's trying to evict her own son. Marilyn didn't even blink. Judge Gillis tapped her pen once on the bench. No, ma'am, she's protecting her legal stake. Know the difference. Haley's lips pressed together, her bravado momentarily stunned silent. Carl placed another document on the clerk's desk. We've included evidence of the attempted HELOC, unauthorized renovations, and the clear record of property tax payment history. Ms. Boon has offered reasonable options, none of which have been accepted. Judge Gillis looked toward Marilyn. Is that accurate, ma'am? You've offered alternatives? Yes, Marilyn said plainly. Today I'm offering one last one. A buyout, full market value, 30 days. Whispers flickered across the back row like dry grass catching flame. Haley's face twisted. We can't afford that. That's not even remotely fair. Marilyn kept her voice even. Then you should have treated this house like shelter, not spoils. Haley rose halfway out of her seat. You've been gunning for me since the baby announcement. Carl stepped between them before it escalated. Your Honor, may I remind the court that this petition is about ownership, not emotion. Judge Gillis nodded, sharp and brief. And I will remind everyone this is not a kitchen table argument. Sit down, Mrs. Boon. Haley dropped back into her seat with a loud sigh. But it was Trey who broke the stillness. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through everything. Enough, he said, finally facing his wife. Just drop it, Haley. We've pushed it too far. Haley's jaw dropped. Are you serious? After everything? We're not winning, Trey said. And maybe we don't deserve to. His words hung there, suspended in a silence no one dared to interrupt. Judge Gillis cleared her throat. I'm taking the motion under advisement, but given the documentation, I'll be making a decision quickly. Outside, the heat pressed down like judgment itself. Marilyn walked ahead of Carl and Rita, purse clutched close, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the courthouse steps. Carl placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We're almost there. Marilyn nodded once, just as her phone buzzed in her purse. Unknown number. She answered, expecting a robocall. What came instead chilled her blood. Mrs. Boon, this is Investigator Lopez with Child Protective Services. We received a report regarding a potentially unsafe environment in your home. I'd like to schedule a home visit this week. Marilyn blinked, her voice slow and measured. I'm sorry, what? A complaint came in anonymously, the voice continued. We're obligated to follow up. Marilyn's grip on the phone tightened, but her voice remained calm. Of course, I'll be home. She ended the call. No one had to ask what it was about. Behind her, Rita muttered. She just lit the wrong fuse. And this time, Marilyn didn't say a word. She just smiled, because Haley hadn't realized. You don't file false reports against someone who keeps records for a living. The knock came at 8:37 a.m. Not loud, not frantic, but deliberate. Marilyn had just taken banana bread from the oven, the warm cinnamon scent curling through the air when the sound pulled her toward the door. She opened it to find a woman in a navy blazer, clipboard in one hand, badge in the other. Her expression was professionally neutral, but her eyes were alert. Behind her, a government-issued SUV idled quietly at the curb. "Mrs. Boon? I'm Investigator Elena Lopez, Child Protective Services." Marilyn's stomach dropped, not from guilt, but from recognition. This was the next move. She stepped aside with a composed nod. "Come in." Lopez crossed the threshold, her gaze scanning the front room. The couch cushions were fluffed. The air was clean, no clutter, no noise. A faint trace of lemon polish lingered in the air. "I received an anonymous report about the living conditions here," Lopez said. Concerns were raised about a hostile environment, verbal aggression, and potential neglect risks for an incoming infant. Marilyn blinked once. The baby's not even born. "I'm aware," Lopez said gently, "but we're required to investigate all reports, regardless of due date." Marilyn gestured toward the hallway. "Feel free to look around. Everything's in plain sight. There are no secrets in this house," and she meant it. Lopez moved efficiently, making notes as she moved from room to room. Marilyn followed silently, letting her eyes do all the explaining. The meticulously organized pantry, the spotless guest bathroom, the garage-turned laundry space she'd recently reclaimed from a temporary cot. In the back bedroom, the almost nursery, Lopez paused. The walls were white again, the crib long gone, but the faint scent of baby powder clung to the corners like smoke from an old fire. "No current child occupants." "None," Marilyn said. "And the only aggression under this roof has come from the people trying to paint over my life." Lopez turned toward her. "Have you had any disputes with other household members?" Marilyn gave a long, deliberate pause. "I've had boundaries violated, and when I enforced them legally, I was rewarded with this." As they returned to the living room, a second knock sounded at the door. Rita let herself in without waiting, car keys in one hand, a flash drive in the other. She spotted the CPS badge immediately. "Am I late?" she asked, breezing past Investigator Lopez. "I brought something you'll want to see." Lopez hesitated. Rita offered the flash drive. "Security footage from my property. Backyard camera faces Marilyn's kitchen window. You'll hear Haley screaming at her, calling her things that would make a sailor blush." This was 2 days before this anonymous report. Lopez took the drive. "Thank you, we'll add it to the case file." Marilyn poured 2 glasses of sweet tea. "Would you like to stay while it plays?" "No need," Lopez said, rising. "The conditions here are not unsafe. In fact, they're exemplary. It's clear this report was retaliatory." Marilyn nodded once, sharply. "I'd like that in writing." "You'll receive a formal dismissal letter within 48 hours, Lopez said. "And for what it's worth, Mrs. Boon, I've seen real abuse. This wasn't it." After she left, Marilyn sat at the kitchen table. Her banana bread was cold now, untouched. Rita sat across from her, shaking her head. "Haley's not even subtle anymore," Rita muttered. "She doesn't need subtle," Marilyn replied. "She thinks noise equals power." Carl called 30 minutes later. He'd already heard. She weaponized the one thing she thought the court wouldn't question. "Your moral character," he said. "That was stupid. And it's about to cost her." "Let's file," Marilyn said, "for a restraining order, civil and legal." "I'm already drafting it." That evening, Marilyn stood by her front window and watched Haley and Trey climb into their SUV. Haley's face was red from shouting again, probably at Trey this time. Marilyn didn't bother listening anymore. The envelope arrived the next morning. Official seal, county court header, Judge Gillis's signature scrawled across the bottom of the page. Motion granted. Exclusive possession of property awarded to Marilyn Elaine Boon. Eviction order pending enforcement. Marilyn didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She just folded the paper, slid it into a new folder labeled Final Steps, and clicked her pen once, like a gavel. War wasn't declared in shouts. It was signed in blue ink. The squad car rolled up slow, quiet as a whisper, its reflection warping across Marilyn's bay window like a ripple in water. A sheriff's deputy stepped out, wide-brimmed hat in hand, the eviction order folded crisply in his other palm. He knocked twice, polite but unmistakably official. Marilyn answered with the envelope already in her hand. The court ruling. She didn't need to say a word. The deputy nodded respectfully. We're issuing a 72-hour notice. If they're not out by then, we'll assist. She simply stepped aside. He pinned the order to the front door like a final nail in a coffin, right over the leftover tape, where a welcome baby Boon banner had once fluttered in pastel pink. Upstairs, drawers slammed like fists. Marilyn heard the sound of hangers being yanked, plastic bins being overstuffed. Then came Haley's voice. High-pitched and acidic. She's stealing the baby's future. Can you even believe this? Marilyn stood in the kitchen, slicing an apple, the knife steady against the board. No one stole anything. You just lost what wasn't yours. Haley stormed in, arms full of clothes, fury etched into every step. You think this makes you noble, kicking your pregnant daughter-in-law onto the street? You were never on the lease, Marilyn replied, or the mortgage, or the deed. From the foyer, Trey stood useless, gripping the handle of a duffel bag, like it was the last life raft on a sinking ship. He hadn't packed much, just enough to signal he'd picked a side, or maybe that he couldn't decide at all. Marilyn didn't look at him. Leave your house key on the table. He hesitated, fingers tightening. Don't make it harder than it already is, she said, quieter now. With a sigh, Trey set the key down beside the bowl of fake lemons Haley had insisted on months earlier. One of the few touches in the house Marilyn had never liked, but tolerated. Until now. They were gone before sunrise on the third day. No farewell, just tire tracks in the dew-covered driveway and a faint smell of stress and baby powder lingering in the upstairs hall. By noon, the locks were changed. Rita showed up that afternoon with a toolbox in one hand and a smart home security kit under the other. I brought gifts, she said, grinning, and about 3 years' worth of rage. They worked in tandem, screwdrivers clicking, cords fed behind baseboards, new deadbolts sliding home with a satisfying clunk. The house exhaled with every turn of the drill. When they were done, Rita stood in the entryway, arms crossed, eyes misty. This house breathes again, she said softly. Marilyn looked around, at the light filtering through clean windows, the silence not shaped by tension, the scent of lemon oil, and something that felt like dignity. Later that evening, she opened the mail. Among the bills and flyers sat a pale yellow card. Inside, in careful cursive, Dear Aunt Marilyn, I saw the news story about the court case. You inspire me more than you'll ever know. Love always, Kayla. Marilyn traced the words with a finger, a small, rare smile curling at the edge of her mouth. She poured herself a glass of iced tea, stepped onto the front porch, and sat in the wooden rocker she'd nearly sold last year when space felt tight. The porch light hummed overhead. The stars blinked silently above. Then her phone buzzed. Carl's name lit the screen. She answered with a cautious breath. I hope you're sitting down, he said. Haley's just filed a civil suit. Wrongful eviction and emotional distress. Marilyn didn't miss a beat. She'll need more than crocodile tears this time. And for the first time since the nursery was painted over her name, she leaned back in the chair, folded her arms, and didn't flinch. Because this house wasn't just defended now. It was armed. The courtroom felt different this time. Less like a battlefield and more like a final exam Marilyn had already passed. She sat poised at the plaintiff's table, eyes calm, posture still, a worn leather folder resting on her lap. Haley sat across from her, makeup applied with surgical precision, belly now visibly heavy, expression equal parts fury and false fragility. The room was packed tighter than before. Word had spread through the community. There were whispers among the rows, neighbors, former co-workers, even a few folks from the HOA board. Some came to support Marilyn. Some came to see if Haley could actually cry her way into a win. Judge Gillis entered briskly, robes flowing like a curtain ready to fall on the final act. Carl stood first. Your Honor, my client has been falsely accused of wrongful eviction and emotional distress. We're prepared to submit a detailed trail of ownership, communications, and evidence that directly contradicts these claims. He clicked a remote, and a screen lit up with a chronological map. Deed entries, tax payments, legal filings, and CPS clearance documentation. All tied to Marilyn, all legal, all time-stamped. Here's every recorded instance of Ms. Boon exercising her legal right as majority title holder, he continued. And here, he changed slides, are photos of damages incurred to her room, her belongings stuffed into storage, and threats recorded through motion sensor audio. The courtroom murmured. Haley's lawyer stood, smugness bleeding from his collar. Your Honor, we contest that these measures were retaliatory and callous. Marilyn rose without being prompted. Carl gave her a brief nod, letting her speak. She walked to the center of the room, held up a small voice recorder. March 3rd, she said, pressing play. Haley's voice rang out, shrill, unmistakable. Let's make her so uncomfortable she just leaves. The room stilled. Then she lifted a printed text thread. Haley's words, screenshotted before deletion. Once the baby's born, we'll have leverage. Old people crack under pressure. Marilyn's voice was quiet but steady. These aren't just words. They were plans. Judge Gillis adjusted her glasses. Defense, do you have anything at all, that suggests your client was treated unlawfully? Haley's lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it again. Haley shifted in her seat, eyes darting like she was finally realizing she'd stepped into a trap with only her pride as armor. The court finds no basis for this suit, Judge Gillis said firmly. There is no evidence of unlawful eviction, nor undue emotional harm beyond what comes from facing consequences. This case is dismissed, with prejudice. The with prejudice hit the air like a gunshot. Haley stood, mouth open in disbelief. You're siding with her? After everything I've been through. Judge Gillis looked over the rim of her glasses. Ma'am, you haven't been through anything. You put people through it. Haley let out a frustrated sound, grabbed her bag, and stormed out. Heels echoing across the tile like punctuation marks. Trey followed, slower, heavier, not even glancing back at his mother. When the doors shut, the courtroom was still. Then someone near the back clapped once. Then again. The judge didn't stop them. Outside, the late afternoon sun blazed down. Marilyn exhaled, slow, steady, as if breathing for the first time in weeks. Carl handed her the final court order with a grin. It's over, he said. No, she replied. It's settled. That's different. Back at the house, Rita waited with a chilled bottle of Chardonnay and 2 mismatched wine glasses. Marilyn kicked off her shoes, took the glass, and finally sat on the living room couch, her couch. The space felt right. Air moved easier through the house. Even the creak in the floorboard near the hall had softened. Rita raised her glass. Queen of the cul-de-sac, baby. They clinked. Marilyn allowed herself the smallest, realest smile in weeks. Later that evening, under the soft lamplight in her study, Marilyn pulled out a sealed envelope marked Will to be updated. She flipped to page 2 where Trey's name sat under beneficiaries. With a steady pen stroke, she drew a neat black line through it. The ink bled slow, final, and permanent. This house wouldn't be inherited by silence. The notary's pen clicked like a countdown. Marilyn stared at the blank signature line on the new living trust. Her name waiting to be rewritten, her future redirected with one stroke. She didn't hesitate. The pen glided across the page in smooth ink. Marilyn Elaine Boon. There. Final. Binding. Heron. The attorney nodded, stamped the paperwork, and slid the final copy across the table with quiet reverence. It's all set. Once filed, the property transfers as per the trust. And the stipulations about elder care? Solid. Ironclad. Marilyn pressed the edge of the paper flat. I want it clear. No one inherits this house who doesn't understand what it costs to keep it. Outside, the Texas sun burned gold against the glass, and for the first time in years, Marilyn didn't feel its heat as a threat. She felt it like light returning. Back home, she tucked the signed documents into a fireproof folder and placed it behind the family photo shelf. One frame remained face down, her wedding picture. Everything else had been rearranged to reflect what remained. That afternoon, she called Kayla. "I have something to discuss with you," Marilyn said. Kayla didn't even wait for an explanation. "If it's about the house, you don't have to convince me. I take care of it the same way you take care of everything, without drama and with receipts." Marilyn smiled. "Good. Because it'll be yours someday. The house, and the responsibility that comes with it." She could hear Kayla's breath catch on the other end. "I don't know what to say." "Start with yes," Marilyn said. "Then show me you meant it when the time comes." After the call, she pulled up her old college fund account, long untouched since Trey dropped out. She reactivated it with the bank, retitled it, the Boon Resilience Fund. Small, modest, but it would help a future student who needed a bridge to something better. Someone quiet, overlooked, just like she had been. Next came the medical directive. She met Rita at the courthouse steps, documents in hand. "I want you listed," Marilyn said. "If anything happens, stroke, surgery, coma, I trust you to speak for me." Rita blinked. "Not Trey?" Marilyn raised one eyebrow. "Right," Rita said. "Forget I asked." They signed it together. Two older women, invisible to most, but legally unstoppable. That night, the house was quiet again. The kind of quiet you earn. Marilyn made a cup of chamomile tea, curled into her favorite chair by the window, and flipped through mail Rita had dropped off earlier. Among the circulars and bills was an envelope. No return address. Inside, a card. Plain, handwritten. "Mom, I know I should have said it earlier. Maybe I was too scared. Maybe I was too selfish. But I'm sorry for letting it happen, for not standing up, for hiding behind silence. I still don't know how to fix it, but I'm sorry. Trey." The handwriting was familiar, still messy at the edges like it had been in high school. It wasn't enough, but it wasn't nothing. She closed the card and slid it into a drawer, next to a small stack of receipts she hadn't thrown away, memories in ink. By the time morning arrived, she was out in the backyard, gloves on, weeding the flower beds, dirt under her fingernails, sun on her shoulders. Peace, at last, rooted where chaos had bloomed. The phone buzzed in her apron pocket. "Kayla." Text. "Would it be okay if I came to visit this summer? I'd love to help with the yard. Maybe repaint the fence too. I've got time, and I'd really love to learn from you." Marilyn stood still, sweat beading at her brow. The dogwood rustled behind her, the wind picking up ever so slightly. She wiped her hands, smiled at the sky, and typed a reply. "Come whenever you're ready. I've got gloves waiting." But even as she hit send, something in her gut said, Kayla's visit wouldn't just be about flowers and paint. Something new was taking root, and not all seeds bloom quietly. Kayla stepped off the Greyhound with a canvas backpack, dusty sneakers, and sunburn already blooming across her shoulders. Marilyn watched her from the car window, pride slipping into her chest like a new breath. "You brought work shoes?" Marilyn asked once Kayla climbed in. Kayla grinned, pulling off her ball cap. "I brought blister pads." That first morning back at the house, the two of them crouched in the backyard garden, their gloved hands deep in soil. The Texas heat pressed down like a heavy quilt, but Kayla didn't complain once. She weeded, dug, hauled mulch. By lunchtime, her forearms were streaked with sweat and dirt, her nails lined in black. Marilyn handed her lemonade over the fence. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm earning something," Kayla said. Each afternoon brought something new, pruning the old dogwood, repainting the cracked fence slats, replanting the overgrown herb boxes Haley had once replaced with decorative rocks. The space began to breathe again, lavender and basil pushing through where bitterness had lived too long. On the third day, they went to the courthouse. Marilyn wore her best blouse, pressed linen, pearl buttons, her hair swept back the way her late husband used to like. Rita met them there, briefcase in hand, and handed Kayla a pen. "You're the witness," Rita said, motioning to the line under Marilyn's signature on the trust document. "No going back now." Kayla looked at her aunt. "Are you sure?" I've never been sure, Marilyn replied. You don't inherit a house. You inherit the duty to protect it. With a flourish, Kayla signed. That weekend, the Dallas Suburban Times ran a piece in the local interest section. The photo showed Marilyn in her garden, sun hat pulled low, hands buried in tomato vines. The headline read, "Senior takes back her home, legally and proudly." It went quietly viral. Marilyn read it once, folded the clipping, and tucked it into a drawer with Kayla's first yard work receipts. Not bad for a woman who was supposed to be sleeping in a garage, she said. Haley, of course, couldn't help herself. Under a pseudonym, she left a comment on the article's Facebook share. Funny how some people confuse selfishness with strength. That poor baby deserved a nursery. The replies came fast, and none of them were kind. Maybe next time don't try to steal your M&L's house. She didn't lose a home, she lost a free ride. I hope that baby grows up somewhere honest. Haley's comment was eventually deleted, but not before screenshots circled the neighborhood moms group like wildfire. Marilyn never responded, but later, as she deadheaded roses, she muttered, "The baby can have the crib. I built the foundation." One afternoon, Kayla was staining the new fence, humming along to a Fleetwood Mac track playing from her phone, when she noticed something wedged behind the garden shed. A metal box, rusted around the hinges and half buried in ivy. "Aunt Marilyn," she called, kneeling. "You know anything about this?" Marilyn shaded her eyes and stepped closer. The moment she saw the faded lettering across the lid, she froze. Boon family, 1974. She hadn't seen that box in over 30 years. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached down and lifted it. The lid creaked open with resistance, then gave way with a pop. Inside, Polaroids yellowed with age, a baby rattle, a lock of hair tied with blue ribbon, love letters folded neatly and bound with string. Letters her husband had written when they were still renting a one-bedroom apartment in Oak Cliff. "Oh my God," Marilyn whispered. Kayla leaned closer. "Is that you two?" The photos showed Marilyn at 28, holding baby Trey on the porch of a home they could barely afford. Another of her husband painting the front steps barefoot, grinning. A life before all of it. Before compromise turned into surrender. "I thought this was lost," Marilyn murmured. "It must have gotten boxed during the last renovation. Forgotten." Kayla touched the corner of a photo gently. "It's not lost anymore." Marilyn stood slowly, the box held close to her chest. Her breath was shallow, but not from grief, from memory. "You ready to keep planting?" Kayla asked softly. Marilyn blinked at her, eyes wet. "No," she said. "I'm ready to start preserving." But as they carried the box inside, neither of them noticed the envelope partially wedged beneath it. Addressed in shaky handwriting, unopened. Something Trey had written but never mailed. The box sat in the center of the kitchen table, crusted in years of dust and sun-faded memories. Marilyn stared at it like it might vanish again if she turned away. Kayla stood beside her, silent, waiting, not rushing the moment. The metal lid creaked as Marilyn lifted it. Inside, time waited patiently. A tiny pair of worn leather baby shoes lay at the top, the stitching still intact, the laces curled like ribbon. Beneath them, a bundle of letters, yellowed and tied with a piece of thread. Each envelope bore her name, Marilyn Elaine, written in her late husband's unmistakable scrawl. She touched them one by one. Then came the Polaroids, her husband in cut-off jeans, grinning with a paint roller, Trey as a toddler, covered in birthday cake, herself in a sun hat, holding a tomato from the first backyard harvest. A life captured in grainy color, frozen but not forgotten. Marilyn's breath caught as she unfolded the top letter. His words, warm, imperfect, funny, rushed through her like a river finding its path again. "If this house ever becomes just walls and not laughter, dig up the roots and plant something new. I trust you to know the difference." Tears came, uninvited but welcome. The kind that didn't burn, just cleared space. Her shoulders shook, and for once, she didn't hide it. Kayla wrapped an arm around her, steady and quiet. "It's okay," she whispered. "He's still here." Later that afternoon, Marilyn and Kayla spread everything across the living room floor, categorizing photos, untangling memories. Rita came by with an old corkboard and a fresh pack of pushpins. "Don't tell me you saved this ugly thing from the HOA sale," Marilyn said, chuckling through watery eyes. "It's vintage now," Rita replied, "like both of us." Together, they created a memory wall. Photos lined along the hallway, each one mounted with care. Baby shoes framed in a shadow box. A corner for letters. A small plaque reading, "Boon family since we decided it." Rita stood back, glass of lemonade in hand, eyes misty. "This home has a heartbeat again," she said. For a while there, it was flatlined. Marilyn nodded slowly. "It wasn't just the house. I think I had stopped breathing too." That evening, Marilyn sat at her desk with a thick sheet of stationery and her favorite blue pen. She didn't overthink the words. She wrote what mattered. "Kayla, if this letter reaches you on your 30th birthday, I hope your hands are still in the dirt. I hope you remember that roots are earned, not inherited. I gave you this home because you gave me back my voice. May it protect you, but more importantly, may you protect it with courage, with boundaries, and with grace." Aunt Marilyn, she folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it into a box labeled "To be opened later." Outside, the new shutters were painted, the gutters replaced, the garden trimmed. The house, once claimed, repainted, rearranged, now stood taller, lighter, lived in by truth, not tension. As Marilyn poured herself a cup of tea and stepped out onto the porch, Kayla handed her a small white envelope, delivered earlier by a neighbor boy. "You've been invited to speak," Kayla said, passing it over. "Civic breakfast. The mayor's wife is apparently obsessed with your story." Marilyn raised an eyebrow, opening the thick cardstock. Inside was a formal invitation bordered in blue foil. "You are cordially invited to speak at the South Lake Community Civic Breakfast theme, Roots, Resilience, and Reinvention, keynote. Guest, Marilyn Elaine Boon." She stared at the name, her name, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like a signature of someone who'd been taken for granted. It felt like someone who had taken everything back. "Looks like they're finally ready to listen," Marilyn murmured, voice steady. "But are you ready to speak?" Kayla asked, half teasing. Marilyn looked out over her blooming garden, breeze rustling the tomato leaves. "I've waited my whole life to say the right thing." And now she'd say it with the weight of every root beneath her. The banquet hall smelled like warm biscuits and strong coffee. Stainless steel trays hissed as servers flipped open their lids, steam rising beside pitchers of orange juice and pitchers of pride. Marilyn stood behind the lectern in a navy blazer, silver brooch pinned to her lapel, notes tucked into her palm, but not needed. She looked out at the crowd, local officials, small business owners, neighborhood watch leaders, 2 rows of women in pastel cardigans who usually stuck to church socials, but now leaned in, wide-eyed. "When they told me I didn't belong in the house I paid for," she began, her voice low but deliberate. "I didn't yell. I documented a few nods. Pens moved." A lawyer in the 3rd row leaned forward, whispering something to the paralegal beside him. "I was called selfish, cold, even told I was hurting a baby I helped raise. But you know what hurts more than eviction?" Marilyn paused, scanning the room. Being erased. Silence blanketed the room. No clinking forks, no refilling glasses. "Dignity isn't generational," she said. "It's earned. And if they make you prove it, prove it. On paper, with witnesses, with fireproof folders if you must. But never let them tell you your worth expired when you stopped being useful." Applause cracked open the quiet, then built. Not the polite kind either. Real clapping. Real people recognizing real fight. After the program, a line formed. Older women, young professionals, a man in his 50s with a legal pad full of notes. One asked what type of lawyer she used. Another asked where to file a living trust. 2 women asked if she'd speak again at a women's shelter event in Plano. She promised she'd consider it. Outside, the breeze rustled the trees. and Rita linked her arm through Marilyn's as they walked back to the car. "You went full Steel Magnolia in there," Rita said. "I almost teared up." "You teared up when your cat turned 20. "Shut up," Rita smiled. "Seriously, I've never been more proud of you." They drove back to the house slowly, windows cracked. Marilyn took in her street, not as a battlefield, not anymore, but as territory earned. Fences straightened, gardens blooming, no more secrets or shade. That afternoon, Marilyn walked the edge of her yard, barefoot in the grass. The sun warmed the top of her head, and a pair of blue jays fought for space in the dogwood tree she'd replanted after the last storm. Kayla sat on the porch steps with a laptop balanced on her knees. "You writing?" Marilyn asked. Kayla looked up, beaming. "I finished it." "What's it called?" Kayla turned the screen so Marilyn could see the title in bold at the top of the document. "The House My Aunt Saved." "I submitted it to the South Lake Essay Scholarship," she said. "Win or not, I wanted to put it down while it was still real." Marilyn blinked hard. "You'll win." They walked together to the front of the house, where a new plaque had been installed in the soil, surrounded by marigolds and river stones. The engraving was simple, but firm. "The Boon House Established by Grit." Marilyn crouched beside it, fingers brushing the smooth metal. Not donated by, not in memory of, not gifted to, established. Later in her study, she opened a new leather-bound journal. Page 1, clean, unclaimed. She wrote slowly, "My next chapter begins here." She closed the book, placed it on the windowsill, and let the light hit the cover. This house no longer carried the weight of ghosts. It carried the proof of her spine. As the cicadas buzzed outside and the sky dimmed, she stood at her front door, hands on the frame, just breathing it in. And she thought back to that moment. What started all of it? She told me, "Your room belongs to the baby now." So I took the whole house back.